This is Joe, Senior Systems Architect with Mark III Systems, and I'll be showing you today how to install, configure, and run FlashCopy Manager for custom applications. We'll be installing this for an application called AIX. We'll be installing FlashCopy Manager 4.1.1 on AIX 7.1, and it will be installed as root user. Before we begin, we have to make sure we meet a couple of prerequisites. First, SSH must be configured for user root and the application owner, AIX ADM, bidirectional between the production server and the backup server. If you're going to be backing up to Tivoli Storage Manager, we need to install the Tivoli Storage Manager client on both the production server and the backup server. The only difference in these two configurations will be the node name. And finally, we need to make sure that the file systems that we're backing up with FlashCopy Manager do not exist on the backup server. Here's a complete list of configuration files that we'll be working with. The dsm.opt file for Tivoli Storage Manager, the dsm.sys file for Tivoli Storage Manager, the in file for FlashCopy Manager, and the volumes list file for FlashCopy Manager. Here is the contents of the dsm.opt file on both the production server and the backup server. The contents of the dsm.sys file will be identical as well for the production and the backup server. The only difference there will be the node name. The as node name will be identical. The contents of the in file list one on each line the file systems that you wish to back up. FlashCopy Manager will traverse LVM and navigate to the proper volumes to include in the FlashCopy based on these file systems. Finally, we get to our target volumes list file. This is a stanza-oriented file and it has many variations. You can consult the guide for the different options for this file. But in its simple form, it has a single stanza with a target FlashCopy volume. This volume is pre-created on the SAN volume controller by you. In my list, I have 3 target volumes. So each time I run the FlashCopy Manager backup, it will cycle between them, preserving the previous 2. Now we'll actually come to the FlashCopy Manager application install. I've already unpacked the binary in a temporary directory, and I'm simply going to run this in the foreground in console mode as user root. We'll be prompted for a few answers during the install, and it takes about 5 minutes to go through the full install, and I'll compress the video here where I can to keep it shortened for this particular demo. I'll get an error message here for my display. It has to do with my remote session. You can ignore that. We're going to choose 2 for the install for English, and then hit enter to continue. Next, we'll just simply type enter here to proceed, and then type 1 to accept the license agreement, and hit enter. Here we need to be careful and be sure to choose option 4, which is for custom applications. So we'll type 4 and press enter here. The default installation directory is fine unless you choose to place it somewhere else. So just hit enter here and it will accept the default. And then finally there is a space validation, and you can see it takes up just a little over a gig of space to install. And we'll press enter here to continue. Now that the install is complete, we'll simply press enter to exit the installer. Before we continue to the application-specific instance of FlashCopy Manager, I'd like to show you the configuration files that we referenced at the beginning of the demo. First, we'll navigate to the default Tivoli Storage Manager client directory and have a look at the dsm.opt file. This is the file that defines our TSM server, and it's a single line. Next, I'd like to show you the dsm.sys file, which is the actual TSM client specific configuration file for this production server. And it has the same contents as the file that I showed you at the beginning of the video. That's our server name that's listed in our dsm.opt file. And this is our as node name that we'll be using to back up our data to TSM. Next, I'd like to show you the end file, which is our instance-specific FlashCopy Manager end file, and it simply lists the file systems on this server that will be backing up to FlashCopy Manager. And that particular file system belongs to PLYVG, and it's the only file system that belongs to PLYVG. So the physical volumes or HDisks that PLYVG owns, which is HDisk 2, will be our source volume in the FlashCopy Manager relationship. And then finally, we'll take a look at the target volumes file. Again, just to get an idea of what the stanzas look like and how they're laid out. Next, we'll actually create the EPIC ADM specific FlashCopy Manager instance. And this will be pushed to a specific directory that is owned by EPIC ADM. In the application install directory, we'll see a setup gen.sh script. We're going to run this with a couple of parameters. One will be to say we're installing it for a user, and two, we're going to show the directory where we'd like to have that specific instance installed. The reason we have to do this is because you can have multiple instances running on the same production server, and each one of them will live in their own directory structure and have their own repository that holds information relative to that application's backups. They are all independent from one another. So now that we've pushed this install to the directory structure that we want, we're going to SU to the EPIC ADM user and begin the configuration of this particular instance. As user EPIC ADM, we will CD to the specific instance directory we created previously as user root, and in this directory we'll see a setup gen.sh script as well. We're going to run this as EPIC ADM user with the advanced flag. By using the advanced flag, we'll get some additional configuration options which we'd like to see during this configuration phase. We're going to be sure and choose option 1 because we do want to configure the production server as well as the backup server. So we'll type 1 and press enter here. Next, we want to change this directory because by default it's the user's home directory. We'd like this to go to a specific instance directory because EPIC ADM does own multiple EPIC instances on this server. Next, we do want to type yes here because we are offloading our backups to Tivoli Storage Manager. And we will keep the default for the FlashCopy Manager home directory here, so we'll just press enter. We'll keep this as the default. We will also keep this as the default. We don't want the debug tracing on, so we'll leave this as default as well. Our actual repository will go in this directory by default, which is what we want, so we're going to press enter here. This value is specific to XIV, so we'll ignore it and press enter. This is the option we want for the backups, restore and delete, so we'll keep that as default as well. We want to change our backup prefix to our EPIC instance prefix, PLY with 3 underscores. This is where we type our end file that we talked about previously, and this is specific to the PLY instance. And then we're going to type in our pre-flash command. This is our free script for the EPIC database. This can be any script that you wish to run prior to the FlashCopy running. And then we need to enter, following this, our post-FlashCopy script, which is our thaw script. And again, this can be any script you wish to run as well. This is to quiesce our database prior to and then thaw the database just following the snapshot. We're going to keep that as the default. We don't want to add another instance, so we'll leave that as the default. Adaptive is what we'd like here as well, so we'll leave that as default. And then you can say yes or no here, or leave it as auto to freeze the file system. We'll say yes here. If you ever have a question about any of these options as you go through the configuration, simply type a question mark and press enter, and it will give you a very good description of what the options are for these configuration parameters and give you some ideas of direction. This particular option is our device class name. We'll only have one for this instance of FlashCopy Manager, so we're going to type that device class name that we'd like to use and press enter. And this is the type of backup we'd like to use to TSM. We'd like a full backup, and no, here we don't want another instance. Now we have to type in our as node name. This is the same as node name you have in the dsm.sys file that we showed you earlier. And then the full path to the DSM dir, which is the default for our instance. And then our DSM config file, the dsm.opt file. And again, that's the same file that we discussed earlier. And it's in our default directory as well. Now this is what our virtual file space name will be called in TSM. We'll name this specific to the PLY instance. Next we'll type in SVC because this is our storage backend. Then we'll type in either the fully qualified domain name or a resolvable name through etc hosts or the IP address to the SAN volume controller. Next, we'll type in the username on SBC that we've defined. This ID must have at least copy services privileges. Our clean rate and our copy rate, I like to change those to 90. Depending on how many relationships you have, this might be too high. This is a small instance, so we're going to bump these up. We'll keep the default for the grain size and the defaults for the other options that are listed so far. Our backup type will be incremental. The first backup will be full. Following that, each flash copy iteration will be an incremental since the previous full. We'll keep this as default. This is default as well. And this will be blank for our purposes. We'll keep this option as the default. Here's where we'll type in our backup host name. Since our flash copy target volumes are not pre-LUN masked to any host, we'll allow FlashCopy Manager to handle that for us. Now here's where we choose our target volume set method. We're going to use a volumes file method for defining our target sets. Following this, we'll enter our actual volumes file that contains the stanzas of the target volumes that we've created on SVC for our flash copy targets. We're going to leave this as default. Now we have to enter our password on SVC for the Epic FCM user that we've defined. And we do want to put these entries in the init tab to start the daemons for FCM automatically. And we do want the backups to TSM to start automatically after the snapshot completes. So we'll type yes here and hit enter. And those are the 3 daemons that will run. And now we're going to configure our backup system. So we'll choose in and type enter here. This is the host name of our backup system. This is a fully qualified name, or it must exist in the host file. There's our backup host name. going to use this same device class. This is the one we want. This is the one we defined just previously. And we need to type root's password on the backup host name. Now, the backup host in this case is not the TSM server. It could be, but it's actually the proxy server that's going to mount these FlashCopy targets and then use its TSM client to back up to the TSM server. This process of pushing the files over to the backup server and configuring FCM on the backup server takes another minute or two, so we'll compress this part as well. And that completes the install for FlashCopy Manager. We're going to quit the configuration now because we're finished, and our next step is to create some TSM node names and the proxy node privileges to back up the data to TSM. So we'll log into TSM now and do that. First, we'll define our production server node name. Next, we'll define our backup server node name. And finally, we'll create our as node node name. And then we'll need to grant authority to our nodes to back up to the as node. This will need to be done for both the production server and the backup server. And that completes the configuration for the TSM node registration. We'll do a quick query on the nodes to make sure all three of them are there. And they are. And you can refine these node creation commands as well to get them into a different policy domain, etc. And now, after all of that hard work, it's time to back up our primary production volumes to our FlashCopy targets and push those backups of the FlashCopy volumes to TSM. The command is very simple. We're just going to run from our ACS dir as epic ADM the FCM CLI --f space backup command. And the timing of this particular view is in real time, so you can see the amount of time it takes to prepare the environment for FlashCopy. You'll see when we actually run our freeze script from this output, as well as our thaw script, and that's the amount of time that the database environment is quiesced. Right there is where we start to freeze. We flush the cache. We run the thaw. Now we're actually creating our FlashCopy. What's happening in the background after we run this FCM CLI Backup command is that FCM actually goes out to the SAN volume controller, makes sure the target volumes exist, creates a FlashCopy mapping between the source volumes and the target volumes, and then goes into a prepare phase where it flushes cache. That occurs after we run the freeze script. Once that prepare has occurred, the thaw script is run. Now we're going to take a look at the status of the backup that we've just run, and that's with the FCM CLI --f space inquire detail command. This will show us our backup ID and the current status of that FlashCopy backup. It is in a tape backup pending mode. Once the FlashCopy is mounted on the backup server, it will be pushed to TSM. This is an important logs directory within this instance of FCM. There's a nice summary file that shows the summary of commands that have run recently, and then there's a details directory which has details specific to every command that's been run. And you can look at these files. They're great for troubleshooting, they're great for checking status, to see where things went wrong, or just to make sure that things went right. So you can cat these files. We can see that this is actually a live file, and it's pushing data to TSM already. So we're going to switch views here and go to the backup client, which is our backup server, and we're going to look at the volume group layout on the backup server just prior to the FlashCopy mounting over here. We just have our two volume groups, and we have two H disks, and then our file system view as well. Now, after the backup has been mounted from FlashCopy Manager, we have our additional volume group, which is temporary. It was imported by FlashCopy Manager after the backup target was unmasked to this server. The volume group was imported, and the file system was mounted for backup to TSM. And once this TSM backup completes, this file system will be unmounted and the volume group will be exported, and then the target volumes will be free for the next cycle. This particular FlashCopy Manager backup completed within just a couple of seconds to the target volume. The actual backup of that target volume to TSM completed in about 15 minutes, and the next time the FlashCopy backup runs, it will use the second volume in the target volumes file. The third backup will use the third and final volume in the target volumes file. And then when the fourth one runs, it will overwrite the first backup in the target volumes file. These backup commands are typically run as entries through cron at some frequency desired, typically at least once per day, and sometimes up to 3 or 4 times per day, depending on the application environment and the recovery requirements from the business unit. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this Mark III demo series on FlashCopy Manager for custom applications. This is Joe signing off. We'll see you next time.